Good morning, everyone. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. This is what I call my morning musings as I share with you a cup of coffee and a few thoughts. And several of you, the viewers, have asked me to respond to Hal Lindsey, and on his television program lately, he has been making some really strong charges against the preterist, that is, the fulfilled view of eschatology. He says that the preterist view is guilty of teaching replacement theology. Now, I'm going to have a lot to say about replacement theology in upcoming segments. But for now, I want you to understand how absolutely fundamentally critical the postponement doctrine is to Mr. Hal Lindsey's theology and all of dispensationalism. And let me explain that, a little bit of preliminary thought here. My dispensational friends say Jesus came to establish the Davidic kingdom. The Jews, however, rejected him, and as a result of that Jewish unbelief, God withdrew the kingdom plan. Pardon me. The 70th week of Daniel was postponed, and the church was established. Now, keep in mind that the dispensational view says the church was not foretold anywhere in the Old Testament. Now, if anybody doubts that that's what dispensationalists believe, I can document everything that I'm saying, and I do document all of this in my books, okay? So, according to the dispensational view, Jewish unbelief led to the postponement of the 70th week, led to the establishment of the church. Now, most dispensationalists believe and teach that the kingdom offer was withdrawn somewhere around Matthew 12, perhaps Matthew 13, but somewhere in there. And that from that time forward, Jesus was not concerned with teaching the establishment of the kingdom. Now, what that means is that the day of Pentecost, Acts chapter 2, was not to have been, should not have been, could not have been in any way the fulfillment of prophecy. Matter of fact, I was in a radio debate with Thomas Ice some years ago, and I quoted from the book Prophecy Watch, which he co-authored with Timothy DeMee, in which the book actually says the prophecy of Joel chapter 2, the prophecy of the outpouring of the Holy Spirit in the last days, Israel's last days. In the book it says that Joel 2 was partially fulfilled on the day of Pentecost. And I mentioned that, and boy, Thomas Ice just came unglued. He said, I don't believe that. I don't teach that. I've never taught that. And I said, well, it's in the book. He said, no, it's not. It's not in the book. I said, yes, it is in the book. And I offered anyone who wanted a photostatic copy of that page. Thomas Ice called me up the next day, and he said, you just misrepresented me. It's not in the book. Well, I gave book and page number, and lo and behold, there it was, of course. And he said, well, I don't believe that. I said, well, it's in the book. Well, here's the deal. Thomas Ice and most dispensationalists must take the position that Joel was not being fulfilled on the day of Pentecost because God had already postponed the kingdom back here in Matthew chapter 12. So nothing on Pentecost is supposed to be the fulfillment of God's promises to Israel. Well, wait a minute. What does Peter do? The Holy Spirit is poured out. That's undeniable, is it not? The apostles and disciples began to speak in tongues as the Holy Spirit gave them utterance. That's pardon me. That's undeniable, isn't it? When Peter and the rest of the apostles were accused of being drunk, speaking in all of these tongues they had never learned, Peter stood up and said, these men are not drunk, as you suppose, seeing it's but the third hour of the day. Now watch this. This is that which was spoken by the prophet Joel. Now mind you, Peter had words available to him to say, this is like it will be one of these days. But that's not what he said. Peter said, this is that which is spoken by the prophet Joel. Now, what that means is, undeniably and irrefutably, Joel's prophecy was beginning to be fulfilled that day. It meant that Israel's last days were still going on. They had not been postponed. Do you see the power of that? You know, I don't really know how much clearer words could be than Peter's inspired declaration, "This is that which was spoken by the prophet Joel." Number one, the prophecy of Joel had to do with Israel. Number two, it had to do with Israel's last days. Israel's last days are when the kingdom would be established. The remnant would be saved. Joel 2:30, 29 and 30. And that's what was beginning to happen on the day of Pentecost. Now what this means is, if Joel was being fulfilled, and Peter said this is that, then God's prophetic calendar had not been suspended. The kingdom offer had not been postponed because Peter said, "This is that." Do you see how powerful Acts 2 really is? Peter's "this is that" cannot be construed to mean this is not that. Peter's words, "this is that," do not mean this is like what it will eventually be. Peter's "this is that," which was spoken by the prophet Joel, demands that Mr. Lindsey and all the dispensationalists are wrong when they claim that Daniel's 70th week was postponed. And do you know what? In the next section, I'm going to show you that, if possible, on an even more powerful level. Right there in Acts chapter 2. Hey, thanks for joining me for this morning's Morning Musings. We'll see you on the flip side.